Hi there, everyone, and welcome to another Novastar Prep webinar. This one is specifically for the families of Woodgrove High School and together in a partnership with their PTSO. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. As you may have known when you signed up for this, or if you're receiving the recording now, this is navigating the SAT success process in terms of the mock tests that we have scheduled with your school coming up. But in general, test prep, anything about different policies related to test optional and things like that that come up in admissions, and certainly the overall value of taking a mock test and what you can do with those results. So tonight we'll be going over the specifics for your school, but in general, what a mock test can do for you and your student. And if we have any students in the audience later, what you can do with those results, some helpful test taking strategies, and certainly I'm here to answer any questions you might have about the testing process and to help you out with this Saturday's mock test coming up on January 11th. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Bernadette Smith. I am the Academic Sales Director here at Novastar Prep, and I'm also a licensed high school guidance counselor. I'm licensed up here in Massachusetts. I know we're in Virginia for this one in particular. Our home base for Novastar is Northern Virginia, so certainly that is our headquarters, and we work with a lot of schools in the Northern Virginia area, including Meridian High School, Paul VI, Oakton High School, Marshall High School, and with you guys at Woodgrove. And certainly countless others. And so when we partner with the school, we're looking to provide educational opportunities such as an SAT mock test, ACT mock test, college essay workshops, anything that you can really think of, we can provide it with our pool of tutors that we have. So as a licensed high school guidance counselor, I started with the company as a college coach and have found my way into various roles here, presenting different information on these topics and working in our sales department as well as our marketing department. But at my heart, I am a guidance counselor and I love working with students to help them prepare for life after high school. And part of that often is taking a standardized test related to college admissions, one piece of the puzzle. So I do have over a decade of experience as a college admissions coach, both in the format of working in the school systems, both public and private, very large public high school here in Massachusetts in the past, as well as a smaller private high school at the onset of my guidance counseling career. But also, I've been a college coach on the side, working with families from all different backgrounds, all different goals, all different situations related to the college search or any post-secondary goals for that matter. Additionally, 15 plus years of experience as a writing tutor, ELA tutor in general. I'm certainly a big literature fan, and I do have a master's degree in school counseling and a master's degree in English literature. I was a college instructor at points as well at for English courses at some colleges up here in the Northeast. And as you can see on the bottom there, there's my email address, Bernadette@novastarprep.com. If you have any questions after tonight's webinar, you can certainly reach me there. You'll be receiving a follow-up email from me as well. One with the link from tonight's webinar. So this is a little housekeeping item. Tonight's webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to access this recording later. And then we'll also get you a permalink for it on our YouTube account that you can access in the future as parents and friends of yours and other students consider taking a mock test and learning a little bit more about it. But enough about me. I do want to share what we're going to discuss tonight, which, as I mentioned, it's all related to the digital SAT. So we will start with some SAT prep strategies in general. Then we'll go on to mock tests explained. Why do you want to take one? Why is it different than the PSAT? What else is there to it? What's the value that you're getting from this? And what should you do with that information? We will also discuss test optional policies. That certainly is a ever-growing, ever-changing topic in the field of admissions with different types of policies, different types of approaches to how to handle those in terms of should you test, when should you test, what kind of scores should you be aiming for, who should you be sending them to. Then we'll talk a little bit about the SAT versus the ACT, because as I mentioned, we do offer ACT mock tests as well. But the tests are different as much as they increasingly become more similar. There are differences between the tests and some things you should know coming up with some changes to the ACT. And then certainly we'll finish up with the path to test day and some parent takeaways. So without further ado, we'll dive in. For those of you that are in attendance tonight, the Q&A is open, so I will take a peek at that, but you can also ask me some questions at the end, or you can follow up with an email to me after tonight's presentation, and we'll make sure we get that taken care of for you. So first things first, we're going to dive into some general test prep strategies. Not that you need them for this weekend's test. This is to establish a baseline, but in general, what you should be looking for as you prepare to take the test and as you disseminate this information to your children, to the students you work with, again, for whomever's in the audience tonight. So first and foremost, number one, we say take a mock test early. And early can mean different things for different students. We do have ninth graders that take them with us. We have second semester juniors that take them with us. We have rising seniors take them in August of their soon-to-be senior year. We even have some seniors take it with us maybe a month before they take the official SAT in the fall. We do say on the earlier side, because we do want you to get that baseline score so that you can identify strengths and weaknesses. You want to be able to see kind of where your student is already really shored up on their skills and feeling really strong and confident, and also how you can maximize that area. But then you also want to find those areas that might need some improvement and some targeted support. Because while a student may have a really great grasp on the content, they may need some help with test taking strategies, or they may have some issues with some of the content that might be a little bit, in their math past, for example, and they need to go back to that geometry and pull out some of that information that they haven't done in a few years. So this helps students identify those strengths and weaknesses so that you can do really targeted test prep rather than trying to study the entire test, which is not what we recommend. You want to see what you're already feeling really strong in and then get a sense of what you need to work on top of that. Also, it's a really helpful way for students to become very familiar with the SAT format. We're almost a year in, coming up with the March test of a full year of digital SATs. Last March was the premiere for the United States. Before that, there were some pilot schools. It was released internationally, but we're about to come up on the full year of the US testing on the digital SAT format. So this is helpful for students so that they can get really used to it. The PSAT they would have taken this past fall would have been in this format as well, and this will test you on the full SAT. So again, in terms of taking the mock test early, the how of this is really that it simulates test day conditions by using a timed official practice test. You can analyze the results to focus those study efforts, as I mentioned, finding those areas that need the most improvement, and working with the scoring of the digital SAT so that you're maximizing your score potential based on the new scoring model. So while it's still out of 1600, it is adaptive scoring on this test. And this is a really great way for a student to experience that in a no harm, no foul situation where they get the results, they get access to all of these insights, to practice questions, things like that. And they can have a chance to take a peek at what this adaptive scoring feels like, because it's likely the first test they've ever taken in an adaptive format outside of the PSAT this past fall. And so for adaptive scoring, and we'll go over this in greater detail as we go throughout the presentation, but that essentially is, it's not adaptive by question, it's adaptive by section. So a student's performance in reading and writing Module 1 dictates how difficult Module 2 is. And then the same thing for Module 1 of math, that performance dictates how difficult Module 2 is. And there's some differentiation there in terms of points. So number two, the reason you want to be, one way that you want to approach strategy for this is to review the results and create a personalized plan with an expert. So since the test is still technically, about to be at its 1 year old, but in its infancy, you do want to make sure that you're working towards a personalized plan that meets your students' needs specifically. No two students are the same, so no two prep plans should be either. And so while you may have two students who have almost identical scores, or they might actually have identical scores, we can have a student with a 1220 and another student with a 1220, and they did very differently in terms of math versus verbal, or they might have very similar math and verbal scores, but they struggled with different areas within verbal, or they struggled with different areas within math. And so the complexities of it really make it so you want to take an individualized, targeted approach versus trying to do more of a general overview of the test, which of course can be helpful, but you will want to get into the targeted approach so that you're breaking down exactly what your student needs to work on versus what another student in a class may need to address, or another student may need help with the time management aspect of the test. Your child might be fine with the timing, but really needs help with eliminating, 2 out of the 4 multiple choice questions. Another student might need more help with advanced math versus another student who feels like they need to work on the more statistics area of the math section because they haven't had a lot of that in school. So again, this is a chance to review the results and create this personalized plan. All students after the mock test are invited to meet with one of our expert advisors. I am one of those for our team, and you'll see 2 other individuals on our list, my colleagues, Fazia and Jennifer, who you can meet with at your convenience with your availability to break down the results and really understand what they mean and what they mean for your child. Insight into the student's performance by section and question type. So not only will you see the general content domain, you're going to get into the very specifics of each type of question within that domain. So for example, an expression of ideas on the verbal section, you'll see that there are rhetorical synthesis questions and questions about transition words. You're going to dive into those in particular, and then also into their level of difficulty. So there's going to be a lot there that you can find. And this is where you get some more details than you'll find on any Blue Book practice test. So this will give you some added value there as well. And then certainly our job is to provide clear next steps so that they can improve their score. And that can be in conjunction with a score goal that they have, or general improvement as they may not have a goal established right now. We can also tell them what's realistic and what they would need to do to reach certain goals, what we know from our experience, what we know from the data available to us, and what we know from our team of extremely highly trained tutors. Number 3 here, we want to use that customized plan, right? We're going to come up with it and then we're going to follow through on it. And this is where we want a personalized plan, again, tailored to your students' unique strengths and weaknesses. While there are a million gigantic SAT books out there and they're very helpful, certainly, you want to be able to approach this knowing that you're not spinning your wheels on something that the student doesn't need assistance with at this time, or perhaps approaching it in the wrong order. You want to make sure that it's specific to where your student is with this baseline score, where they are with the math class they're taking at school right now, where they are in terms of their goals for the college list that they have now, the test policies that those schools have, and the averages that they're accepting. We want to focus on high impact areas for maximum improvement. So this is what I mentioned earlier, where we're looking at adaptive scoring, and we know that there are easy, medium, and hard questions. Hard questions are worth more points. When you test into module 2 hard, you're going to be given more hard questions, so therefore your score can be higher. When you test into module 2 easy, you're going to be capped at a certain lower score because they will give you fewer difficult questions. So when we talk about maximizing improvement, it's strategic in terms of the scoring of the test, but also particular to your students' areas of strengths and weaknesses so that we can really maximize that and get their potential out on a score report and really show what they're truly capable of. And then, of course, this looks like an integration of one-on-one tutoring, practice tests, and strategy related sessions for a holistic approach. And when I say that, we see a combination with our tutors, and while no 2 students are the same, what we typically want to see is this first mock test that you're taking with us, see the results. If you have PSAT results available as well, we want to take a peek at those. Dive into that, and the tutor is going to develop the test prep plan based on what they see there, as well as other information you share with us. And they're also going to offer another mock test several weeks into the test prep journey to evaluate progress. You want to make sure that everything you're doing is working, and we want them to be able to see the results of that before they ever take the official test. So at staggered points throughout the students' test prep tutoring, they will be encouraged to and asked to take additional practice tests by their tutors. So the tutors can assess okay, did we make progress on nonlinear equations, but we still need to work on nonlinear functions? What do we need to do here that's different? Or are we still struggling with area and volume back in geometry, and we really need to hone in on that so we can go get those points on that section? And then, of course, Strategy is going to be everything related to how much time should you spend on each question? What do you do if you have no idea what the answer is? How do you approach some of these more complicated student produced responses on the math section? Different things like that about actual test day. Should you do all the questions in order, or should you start them and jump to the end? Different things of that nature, particular to your student. And this is where I also just want to share, beyond what we would suggest about taking a mock test, meeting with us to create a personalized plan, and then acting on that plan. I also want to share some information about general strategies that you and your student should be aware of going into the practice test, going into the official test, and as you continue throughout this process. We do want to encourage consistent practice using full-length timed SAT mock tests to simulate test day environment conditions. This is because we need students to build up test day stamina. It is a long test. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes long. They haven't quite had that type of test necessarily, especially in a standardized format in high school, and it is lengthy. You are going to feel that difference when you test from module 1 into module 2 hard, and you're going to feel that level of difficulty increase. And so you want to build up the stamina just as if you were preparing for a 5K or a 10K. You want to make sure that you're getting through a full run before you ever try the official one on race day. So the same thing here, we want to do that with testing. And we can't stress that enough. Going in blind for your first SAT without ever having sat for the full 2 hour and 15-minute full-blown SAT can be extremely difficult, can be jarring to students, and that clock ticking away at them can start to feel really stressful. As I mentioned, this builds stamina, helps identify those weak areas we discussed before, and improves that time management. And like I just mentioned, it really reduces test day anxiety because it's not the first time the student's laying their eyes on a test structured that way of that duration. So certainly, as you know, this weekend on January 11th, we do have a mock test event coming up particular to your school, but we offer them all the time. So every month you're going to find them with us, and there's online ones, in-person ones. Online, you'll have a Zoom proctor, and they'll be there to be of assistance. All of our tests are set to mock test mode, so they're timed exactly like the SAT itself. But also, after taking this first one with us, you can reach out to myself or one of my colleagues. And now that your student's adjusted to the platform, you can go ahead and take other tests at your convenience, as long as you have a 2 hour and 15-minute window in front of you. Of course, we want it to be in a quiet situation for your students and to simulate test day as much as possible. And they will be taking their tests at a test center versus ever at home when they take the official test. But there are multiple opportunities for students to continue to build that stamina, and we certainly do recommend that. Number 2 here, mentioned this earlier, and these are just some specifics into it. We do want to have targeted practice related to strategy, and particularly related to specific question types. This is what I mentioned earlier about kind of getting into the content domains and then the sub questions within there, where we're getting into very particular types of algebra questions. So is it a linear equation in 2 variables? Is it something in the advanced math section related to nonlinear functions? Is it a reading comprehension issue that has to do with words in context? Is it more so related to some grammar rules? We know students can struggle with, for example, the comma usage on the SAT. So that's in the end of sentence versus within sentence punctuation part of the test, where you can lose points very quickly there. And we want to make sure we're using strategies so that you can go recoup those when you take the official test. This allows students to focus their efforts on areas that will yield the highest score results. So a student could spend far too much time studying something that they're very strong in and then leaving something that needs improvement on the table. And they may end up getting the same questions that they're already comfortable with correct, and still leaving those ones out there that they're not as confident in. So we want to go in and maximize score potential, knowing that there's certain areas that they're always going to do particularly well in. We want to go make sure those weaker areas are bringing some points up and increasing that score. Certainly, we personalize all of our test prep plans based on practice test analysis, but we also want to hear what's going on when they take tests at school. We want to know what happens when they're doing any kind of timed homework assignment. How have they done with like shorter quizzes in the past when it really feels like that clock is ticking on them? Anything that they can tell us about, you know, how they felt using the Desmos calculator, which is built into the test. Would they prefer to use a calculator in front of them? That can be a strategy as well. Some students like just having the physical calculator rather than the one built into their screen. Another strategy here, we want to review and analyze mistakes. After each mock test, we recommend that you review incorrect answers to understand why they were wrong and how to approach similar questions. We certainly have our tutors do this with our students, but this is a recommendation for anyone, whether you're engaging in tutoring or not, to make sure that you're looking at that to avoid repeated mistakes. Our advanced Java-driven platform, when you look at it, you will be able to see an explanation as to why choice A is correct, why B, C, and D are wrong, for example, which one you chose, what percentage of students chose that, and then it also connects you to practice questions related to that particular one. So again, this can help you avoid mistakes that can come up repeatedly because you are going to see similar question types. Next, we want to build those test taking strategies. So these, we talk about content first, and then we talk about strategies. This is time management. What is a guessing strategy? You may have heard these in the past. If all else fails, choose C, things like that. You know, there's particulars to go over there with a tutor, and how do you eliminate incorrect answers when you know off the bat that A can't possibly be correct. Is it also that D is incorrect, and then at least you have a 50-50 chance between two responses? Those are some strategies as well. You'll also hear from tutors, particular to your student, about how they should approach going in order with the questions, jumping around a little bit, what works best for them. Students have their own feelings and their own way of going about tests that feels comfortable to them, so taking that into consideration as well. You know, we want to maximize their scores even if they don't know the answer to every question. And odds are they don't know the answer to each and every question. Let's see here. All right. Let's see. All right. And so then content areas. So I just mentioned we talk about content, we talk about strategy. We want to make sure that we're mastering the content areas with the highest impact. So the algebra section on the math section is the biggest. The SAT tends to be, or is rather, a much more algebra-focused test than the ACT. The ACT has more geometry on it. So we want to make sure that since that's so crucial to getting a high score, that we're focusing on that area because it does have that impact. Same thing with evidence-based reading in the verbal section. So while you're going to find other questions in there about punctuation and grammar, you will notice that the evidence-based reading will carry the highest weight and be of the greatest multitude. So you want to make sure that that's where you can go get the highest impact on your end score. Core content is going to boost students' confidence and overall performance. So this is where our learning coaches are going to create structured lessons based on those key content areas. Number 6 here, like we want to talk about engaging in active learning. So this is when techniques like explaining answers out loud, or, you know, with a lot of my students in the past, I would have them read their college essay out loud and really see if it sounded right to them. This can be them sitting at the dining room table with you and explaining how they came to, you know, choice C on question 3 and how they arrived at that explanation. That builds confidence in their ability to solve the question. They feel good explaining it to somebody. And then it just reinforces that knowledge. So they may teach you how to do a certain problem in order to make sure that they really understand it. And the more that they do that, the more ingrained that type of problem will become. And certainly it engages our students more deeply when they do it with their parents, when they do it with their coaches, when they do it, you know, meeting with their guidance counselor, so that they're showing that they have the understanding rather than perhaps some, you know, okay, I guessed on this one, so I'm not really sure how to do it. What if I can't guess next time? What if it's much more difficult, more complicated question? What if it's of the hard variety? I need to make sure I really know how to do this. And one way to do that is to explain it to somebody else. All of our sessions are extremely interactive and personalized, and our tutors will ask your students to explain how they arrived at an answer regularly as they go through both homework assignments and in-class assignments during their interactive sessions. And I mentioned that again to reiterate that these are not lecture-based one-on-one tutoring sessions. These are very engaging and they're related to doing the work together so that your student, we never want the tutor to assume they know how to complete a particular problem. We want the student to be able to show that they have that. And again, that's going to reinforce that knowledge. So here's a little bit of, taking a peek at from the January 11th mock test that we have coming up this weekend to a student's March 8th official test. So if you're in attendance tonight, you may be signed up or may have your child signed up to take the mock test on January 11th with us. And I apologize, I got to change that there. It says December 14th, but this is for the January 11th test. After the test, you will be invited to meet with somebody like myself, and you'll find my name on the list again, along with two of my colleagues, to schedule and attend a consultation with us to review those results, as I just mentioned, understand the performance by module and question type, and to receive that personalized prep plan. Then we would encourage students to register for the March 8th SAT. You have until February 21st for that, and I would encourage you look at the registration sooner rather than later because test centers near you can fill up very quickly, and you don't want to add a commute in the morning and suddenly your student has to drive an hour, hour and a half to take the test. So make sure you sign up not too late, and even if you sign up after the deadline, there's a late fee and things like that. So make sure for the official test with the College Board, you're taking a peek at that on their website and getting registered for that. Same would go for the May and the June test, both very popular test dates. Then we would encourage you to participate in one-on-one tutoring based on that personalized prep plan. You have several weeks. Now we're sitting at 9 weeks until the March test, and that can afford 2 sessions per week of targeted test prep related to their performance on this mock test and looking ahead to the March 8th. We're also going to be looking beyond that to the May or June test so that your student can super score and take their best verbal and their best math. And on average, every student who takes the test for a second time does go up. So that goes up even more so with targeted tutoring. Our tutors, as I mentioned, will have students take another mock test while working with them to make sure they're making the progress they need to be before ever taking the official test. And then you want to plan, as I mentioned, for the May, the June, perhaps the August test date, depending on your child's plans and their goals, figuring out when they should take it, which makes the most sense for them, and what your tutor would recommend after working with their student. One thing I always give as a piece of advice is with the May test date, for some students, they have several AP exams during that month, so they may lean more towards the June test date just to alleviate some of that stress. While there are finals in June and things like that, there are fewer standardized tests of that nature, so that might feel more comfortable. Other students might have no problem taking the May with the knowledge of those other AP exams, or perhaps they don't have any. And then the next one after that, we do skip June and July on the SAT calendar. There's no tests offered during that time frame by the College Board. So the next one after that will be the August SAT. And so again, for juniors, I do recommend taking the March and one of the later spring, or if you take a later spring, then take the August as well. All right. So now we're going to get into the mock tests themselves so that you can share with your students what to expect about this. And certainly, as I mentioned, it's very similar to the PSAT, but testing more complex content. And then also it is of a different scoring variety there. So we'll get into this so that you know what they should be seeing this Saturday when they take the test with us, or if they take a future one, or if we have any students in attendance here, this will help you know what you're walking into, get yourself familiar with the format, and so you can navigate it very easily. But again, you'll be logging in a half hour early before the test begins rather, and you'll be working with a proctor who will also show you any specifics and help you troubleshoot. But we haven't had any major issues, obviously. It's very self-explanatory, and most students today are very comfortable taking a test online. So mentioned this earlier, but just to reiterate, the benefits of a mock test are that it simulates test day. So you want to experience that real pressure. You want the clock ticking. You don't want to just simply answer questions and just be like, okay, now I've seen some. You want it to be under test day simulation, the pacing of it, the types of questions, the distribution of easy, medium, and hard question types, and then how that changes in Module 2. We also want this to be a chance to identify those strengths and weaknesses. We want to pinpoint exactly where your student is doing particularly well, and then what areas might be a deficit or something that just needs refreshing. I mention this frequently, but some students are 2 years removed from geometry and simply need some refreshing on lines, angles, and triangles. Or perhaps the trigonometry questions that came up, they really covered trigonometry very briefly in Algebra 2. Maybe it was a short unit. Maybe they never got to it. This can be a chance to find those little areas and make sure that when it comes to official test day, you feel much more comfortable answering those. Biggest takeaway from a mock test is building confidence. You want to feel used to the test, exposed to the test, you understand the format, you can reduce that anxiety. And then we use these results to plan effectively. We want this to guide prep. You never, as I mentioned, want to go into test day completely blind for the official test. This is a baseline. Helps you establish that baseline, helps your student feel like they know where they stand on a full-blown SAT and have even more of that data that I mentioned that goes even more in depth than what you would find on other mock test formats. So as I mentioned, it is adaptive exactly like the official SAT. So you're going to find that, as I mentioned before, a student's performance in Module 1 of reading and writing dictates how difficult Module 2 is. So Module 2 can either be easy or it can be hard. There's no medium, there's no in between. If you test into easy, you leave about 200 points on the table that you cannot access. Same thing goes for math. Math Module 1, the student's performance there dictates whether or not they go into Module 2 easy or Module 2 hard. And again, that point restriction goes into effect if they test into Module 2 easy. Typically speaking, students need to have roughly 70% correct on Module 1 to test into Module 2 hard. We want students testing into hard because that's where the most maximum point potential is. So this was established by the College Board in order to establish a target score in Module 1 and help students get there. We, of course, want students to be able to maximize their scores. So for some students, step 1 is how do we get them into Module 2 hard? And step 2 is what do you do once you're there and the questions are a lot harder. Same exact number of questions. So this mirrors the SAT exactly like that. You'll find no difference in number of questions, how many easy, medium, and hard, things like that. It is formulated the same way. Same exact timing, 2 hours and 15 minutes long. Each section is timed exactly the same as you would find on official test day. And the modules are in the exact same order. You're always going to start with reading and writing. You're always going to end on math. So here's some things about like the appearance and navigation of the test. Students will log into their accounts on test day and see the following. So if you have not yet received your login information, or perhaps you just signed up, you will be receiving that from one of my coworkers, Karen. She'll be sharing all of that information with those of you that are registered for the test. And if you register today, tomorrow, or Thursday, you'll also receive that. Students will have a login that will typically be their first and last name, no space, and then a password. But again, you'll receive that from us. We do encourage parents to sign their students up with, there's a spot when you do registration for student email. We do recommend that it is the student's email themselves. If it's yours, it's no big deal, doesn't matter. But it's nice for them because then they can easily log back in if they lose their password or something like that. And the first thing they'll see is digital SAT number 1. And you'll see that only reading and writing is unlocked. Math won't unlock until a student takes the reading and writing section. The reason for that is it's the exact same way with the official test. Students can't jump to the math section if they want to. They need to start with reading and writing. Within a singular section, they can jump around between question 2, question 16, question 8, no problem, but you cannot jump ahead to math until you finish reading and writing. So you'll see it's 64 minutes in this section. So it's 2 different modules. One's 32 minutes, the next one's 32 minutes. And again, that module 2 can either be easy or hard. Students will just click start and then they'll pop right into that. But again, the proctor in the morning is going to go over this. They don't need to memorize this and we'll tell them when to start. There'll be a little clock on the platform itself, just like on the official SAT, and they'll see that. They can dismiss it. It will repopulate though when there's 5 minutes left, so they know exactly how much time they have at that point. Instructions and tools, these are the exact same ones you're going to find on the official SAT. And what you'll see, after a student clicks on that, it will take them to this screen and show them that they have the highlight feature, which students can highlight anything on the reading and writing questions. You can highlight on math as well. You can annotate, so we'll let you type little notes in and save it. Of course, the elimination feature, which of course we had on paper by just crossing things out, but this allows students to visualize that so they can say, okay, I know it's not B, I know it's not C, I've got a 50-50 chance between A and D. And then the flag button, which I also call the bookmarking button, allows students to note certain questions that they maybe are struggling with, they're not quite sure about the answer, so that they can go continue on and simply look at the bar above to click back to question 16 instead of having to hit back, 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 back. This just lets them bookmark the question that they need to go back to. All right. And so once they get into that, it's very, very user-friendly. They're just going to click next after every question, or as I mentioned, navigate as they see fit through the questions that they have in there before going into module 2. Then they'll get a 5-minute break before math starts, and then they'll go into math module 1. During registration and after test completion, you'll book a free consultation with a test prep advisor, again, like myself, so that we can show you exactly what happened on the test. So we can show you how long they spent on every question. We can look at one where they spent way too long on it and how do we cut that down. We can look at ones that maybe went by a little too quick. We can make recommendations based on the time remaining on a section or how to improve that time management. We can look at question type, everything that's in there, really get a sense and a pattern of what's happening and make recommendations for maximizing that score and giving you that personalized prep plan. Your student, by signing up for this test, has access to a digital SAT workbook, which this is the platform, but once they're in there, they'll be able to see it's a full workbook with 1,400 practice questions and their personalized results. This is theirs for a full year. If they work with one of our tutors as well, their tutor becomes their teacher on this platform and can assign them homework that matches up with their results and can monitor their progress as they continue to work on areas that need improvement and continue to hone those test-taking strategies. All right. And here you can see a score overview sample here. This is a student that earned a 1350 on the test. So you can see this will show you, how scores are calculated, gives you a graph here just to see where it lands on the 1600 scale. And then you can see here that this student tested into module 2 hard each time. It will show you if they tested into easy, for example, here. Sometimes students will split on this. Maybe they're not as much of a, or feel as though they're not as much of a math individual. So they'll see math module 2 easy on this, and we can look at it that way. We can tell you the percentage correct on each section and what needs to be done to test into module 2 hard. Because as I mentioned, we want every student to test into module 2 hard because that's where they can get the maximum amount of points. Typically speaking, you're going to see a 600 max here if students test into easy. And obviously, if they get any wrong, it's going to go down from there. So we want to make sure they have the full complement of points to work with so that they can achieve their score goals. Students will also see this, and we'll go over this with parents and students when we meet with them to show them by question, this is module 1 for reading and writing, how many easy questions they received, how many medium, how many hard. Excuse me. And then by content domain, okay, where did that one question that I got wrong come up in? Okay, it was in craft and structure. Okay, there's one over here in standard English conventions, crushing it on expression of ideas and information and ideas. You'll also see here, no yellow popped up here, but often in the math section, you might see that where a student left one blank, and that's usually on a student produced response where there was no option to pick something from a multiple choice question. While we do want students to answer every single question, that's where you tend to see it because it's kind of hard if you have no idea how to answer the question to randomly put in the number 12. But obviously on any multiple choice question, we want students to guess even if they have no idea because there is no wrong answer penalty. So you're always better off putting in an answer. And The hope would be 1 out of the 4 multiple choice questions, you pick the right one and you're all set there. For the student produced responses, it's a little bit different, but again, that's a strategy to work on with a tutor as well. But this information is really, really helpful. Students will be able to see all of this and they'll be able to assess where they stand on the test. We'll be able to really dive into this even further than what you can see right here about what that means for your child and what they should be working on next. And what's the most logical next step, what makes the best use of their time, and what makes the highest impact on their score. So students can also review all of their answers. So for example, they'll go through and see every single question that they answered on the test, and they can see what they chose, what the correct answer is. They can see the percentage of students that also chose that with them. So you can see here on number 17, this student certainly wasn't alone. This is one of those punctuation questions I mentioned earlier, where they can see that another student also thought that it should be comma followed by and. Rather in this one, we want to make sure that it's current and. I know you can't see the full paragraph here, but this is just an example to show you that these are the type of questions they're going to encounter and the information they're going to get related to that. Same thing here on a math question. You can see that 80% of students chose the C, which is correct on this particular question. But what's really helpful, they'll also get a solution after every single question, whether it's right or wrong. So they'll find out why D is the right answer on that one that we just saw there. And this was the ocean currents question with the punctuation asked there. So they'll get an explanation as to why D is correct, why A, B, and C are incorrect. And then if they click on follow-up exercises here, they'll be taken to questions that are exactly like that one of the same difficulty level from our pool of questions. So extremely valuable because then they don't have to dive through 1,400 questions trying to find something that will help them. This will help them target specifically what they need to work on, again, versus trying to explore every possible kind of question. All right. And again, if questions pop up, please do let me know and I'll be happy to answer them. It's a little hard to see the Q&A when I'm presenting, so if I miss one from anyone, I will get to it before we finish up tonight, certainly. But also anyone can send me some questions after, and I'm happy to stick around with questions or answer any emails. Did mention we were going to talk a little bit about the SAT versus the ACT here. And right now we're talking about the differences between the tests now. I say now because the ACT, like the SAT did last year, is about to change. But as of today, here are the differences between the tests. The SAT is in a completely digital format. You cannot take a paper-based SAT unless you are a student with a documented disability that requires taking a paper-based test. Obviously, a paper-based test eliminates any kind of adaptive scoring. So that's one area to it where the test will be a little bit different than what a peer may be taking. But the only way a student now can take a paper-based SAT is if they have a documented disability. That being said, it is an adaptive test. So as I mentioned, it is adaptive by section, not by question. So a student will never feel like, oh, I answered 2 wrong and number 3 got way easier, so that's how I know it was adaptive. That's not how it is. It is that they may feel when they test into module 2, oh, this feels a little easier than the first one, or it might feel much more difficult. Some students don't notice it and just continue on and they're very even-keeled in it. But the difference is that module 1, a student's performance there dictates how difficult module 2 is. You're going to find more algebra on the SAT, and this has not changed with the official test, and it shouldn't change in the near future. What right now we refer to as there are fewer time-wasting grammar questions on the SAT versus the ACT. There are very many of these type of grammar questions on the ACT that ask the questions in a very backwards and roundabout way instead of a little bit more straightforward. And also the SAT is shorter in duration as of right now. So again, sitting at 2 hours and 15 minutes. We have the ACT here that is digital at certain locations right now. So students have the option to take the exact same test as the paper test on a computer. So that's an option at certain locations right now. When you go to register for the test, you will see if it's an option. The paper test is still available everywhere. The test is not adaptive. There is more geometry. There is a science section and an optional writing section. So what I'm about to tell you kind of changes some of that moving forward, is that in April of 2025, so that means the February ACT is exactly what I just described, exactly the same, but starting in April 2025, any student who chooses to take the test online will experience a shorter test and more flexibility. So this will give them some choice in it. So in April of 2025, the science section becomes optional, the test becomes shorter, and instead of five possible answers on every multiple choice question, they will now have four. So that should make it easier, and it will not necessarily easier, but more student friendly, and they'll have more time per question. A big thing we often heard from students and parents was, for example, the first section on the current ACT is 75 questions long, and it was very exhausting for students. Now we're going to find that those sections have become smaller. So every few years, this tends to happen where the SAT makes a big change and then the ACT makes the same almost kind of change, and they always play catch up with each other. So that's starting in April 2025, just on the students who are choosing to test online. Beginning in September of 2025, all students testing on a Saturday. So that means when it's a national test day. There are differences with school test days. All students testing on a Saturday beginning in September of 2025, whether online or on paper, will benefit from these enhancements. So what that means is that the paper-based test will get shorter come September as well. So, and they will have those fewer multiple choice responses as well. So that's where it's shifting. ACT has said that they are not taking away the paper-based test whatsoever. That's what they're saying as of right now. Check with me in 2026 when they change their mind again. But all students will benefit from these enhancements. But if you take the paper-based ACT in April, you will still have to take the science section. When you take it in September, you'll have that flexibility of choice. Onward, they're going to offer both tests simultaneously for this foreseeable future. And again, we mentioned this, but just another timeline you can look at. National Online ACT, April 2025 is when the change is going to affect. National Paper and International ACT, September 2025. And then in-school testing, so those specific school test days, which you don't have to worry about, will be April 2026. All right. So key changes just explained in a little bit more detail for everyone here. And again, this is being recorded, so you'll all get this and you can review this information, and I can certainly screenshot some of this and send it your way. But basically, you're going to see a reduction in the total number of questions. So they've removed 44 questions in total. The test has now come down to 125 minutes in duration. Every student will experience more time per question. The timing felt like much more of a crunch before. Now they're going to experience more time per question. For math questions, you're going to see the choices come down from 5 to 4. So instead of 5 multiple choice responses, you're going to see 4 there. And students will be given the option to take the ACT with or without the science section. So some students may choose to take that so they have what's referred to as a STEM score associated with their test scores. It can be, for students that do particularly well in that, it should help, and it's always a nice thing to have. If it doesn't feel like a strong suit, you certainly don't need it. And even if you're a student that's pursuing going into a STEM field, certainly I would encourage you to have it, but they are going to look at like AP Bio more than that, AP Physics, things of that nature, because these questions are not requiring a lot of content knowledge in science. It's more so about the scientific method. Can you look at a graph and interpret data? Things like that versus strict information about biology or physics or chemistry. So if you're interested in science and you enjoy it and you want to pursue it, certainly go ahead and keep it on the test. Just remember, even now, it's not considered as important a part of the test as it had been in the past. So they realize that, so they did make it optional. But if you are interested in it, you think you'll do well in it, I still would encourage you to take it. All right. So in terms of picking the right test between the SAT and the ACT, if you're participating with us this weekend on the mock SAT, you're taking the first step in the sense of getting a sense of where you stand with one of the tests. We do have ACT mock tests. You can take one of those with us as well, and we can get a sense of the difference between the scores. There is a comparison chart between the two types of scores because ACT is out of 36 points, SAT is out of 1,600 points. Very, very different. But there is a concordance table that we can look at to tell you what your SAT score means versus what it could be on the ACT. Or if you take both of them, we can tell you which the college views as higher, and which is a better representation of you. Many times students will take both and get almost the exact same score when we do the conversion. Other students, we will see a very big difference, and that's, the testing format, or maybe perhaps they're stronger in geometry than they are in algebra. But a lot of times, the most recent family I met with about it, certainly the scores were almost the same. It was like a 28 on the ACT was almost exactly a 1320 on the SAT, and that's exactly what the student received. So again, don't worry too much about the choice. Always go with where your student feels the most comfort, and feels the most prepared. But another thing you can look at right now is leveraging the availability of SAT practice resources. So everything I just mentioned about the test changing, we don't know yet what the questions are going to look like. We don't know how much they've changed from the ones in the past. The ACT themselves have said that they're putting out the first practice test in 2025. So we haven't, it just says spring 2025 right now. So no professionals have seen the new ACT as of yet. And knowing that we have a regular ACT, official ACT scheduled in February, that's the same old test that it has been. So right now, I do recommend, if students feel comfortable with the SAT, to stick with it because you have the most resources for that. Every practice question that's out there right now for the SAT is related to the digital SAT. Some things changing with the ACT, we just don't have them yet. As soon as we do, and the testing platform that we use will be updating the ACT accordingly based on the release of that first practice test from the ACT themselves. So take advantage of the fact that we have a full year of the digital SAT under our belt nationally, as well as another 6 to 8 months of it internationally. So we know the most about this test versus the new test. And when I say we, I mean the entire education community, and everyone working in test prep, every guidance counselor like myself. This is what we're aware of right now. So run with it while you can, but there's still going to be plenty of time once they release the new information for sophomores and juniors, looking at that. Consider test familiarity and past success. If the student has previously performed well on ACT practice tests or prefers its current content, you may want to take that February test. That may be your last chance at that, but the paper-based test will still be similar. Without practice materials for the new ACT format, it may be risky to rely on it as the primary test choice, but if you had a good experience with it, they're not going to change it 100%, so you can still feel comfortable with that. For the class of 2026, I do say consider sticking with the SAT, as I just mentioned. It's critical test time, test prep time right now, especially if we're looking at the March or the May, for example. You can also take a practice ACT with us and take the paper or virtual test in February. So those are definitely options. Meet with us, go over what makes sense for you. So as much as I can give general advice here, meeting with a student and their family, I can give you really direct advice based on the classes that you're taking and your experience with the PSAT and things like that, that we can look at. And of course, your results from the SAT coming up this weekend. If you're in the class of 2027 and younger, so my daughter is class of 2027, I would say take a mock SAT now, and then take a new ACT when it's available. So the mock ACT, to see which test is a better fit for you. There are always advantages to a new test that comes out. It's, they're touting how much more flexible and easy it is, but there are disadvantages too, which just lie in the unknown. In those first couple test dates, colleges aren't aware of how it's going to go just yet. But for the class of 2027, that's why it makes it safe for them to try it. So again, I would encourage them to do so with a practice ACT with us, especially once we announce the changes to ours. All right. And so going to some final takeaways here, keep in mind that the SAT emphasizes, in terms of the SAT versus ACT here, concise reading passages and analytical thinking. At the end of the day, the SAT is still a reasoning test. The ACT includes longer reading passages and an emphasis on science and data analysis. but that is about to change. So think about that. Want a STEM score? You want to take the ACT if you want to have that STEM score available to you. Again, if your child is very interested in that but prefers the SAT, don't worry. If they're taking rigorous classes related to STEM and they're taking AP Bio or they're taking an IB science class or something like that, then they're going to still be in good shape with that. Colleges certainly do not rely strictly on the ACT science section whatsoever to demonstrate someone's ability in science. It's a nice to have, but not a must have for STEM students. And, so, like I said here, strong science grades and AP IB exam scores over ACT science anyway. So if they lean more SAT, don't worry about it. But if you'd like to have a STEM score and you're undecided, this could be a good decision factor. All right. And as I mentioned, I was going to take a few minutes to go over some test optional policies because that relates greatly to choosing which test to take, when you should test, if you are going to test. And it's helpful because this is constantly changing to go over it periodically. So I'll be quick because I know we're running out of time tonight, but there are several different types of policies out there, and I'd like to share those with you just from the school counselor point of view of what we've seen and what we've done in terms of college coaching. So general test optional, that means scores are not required but can be submitted. So a school, Virginia Tech is test optional right now, for example. They'll look at them. You don't have to send them. They're not going to ask you where they are unless you indicated you were going to send them. Then there's conditional test optional. Those are where schools may be optional in general, but specific programs do require them. You'll see this a lot with nursing programs at particular colleges that they'll say, okay, the whole school is test optional, but if you're applying to the nursing program, you have to send an SAT or ACT score with your application. Some honors programs will do the same thing, different STEM related majors. You'll see it with, different types of engineering programs may be looking for an SAT math score or an ACT math score to get an understanding of where you stand. Test blind, these are schools that will not even look at it if you sent it to them. So you're just wasting your time. They are blind. They don't want to look at it. They're not going to accept them. Test flexible. This is a newer thing in the last couple of years where schools will look at, well, newer in the sense that more schools have adopted it. They'll look at alternatives like AP and IB scores. Again, it's not the general norm. More schools are going to look at some of the SAT and ACT scores, but you will want to look at this school by school to see what they're suggesting or what their options are. And at times you may feel like for a particular program, submitting a particular AP score or several AP scores would be advantageous. Obviously, these would be AP scores from sophomore or junior year because the senior year ones, those scores are going to come out in July after you graduate. So you want to make sure you have those for the admissions season. And then there's also placement required. So these are some schools that are like, I don't need to look at it for admissions, but we don't offer a placement test and we just want your SAT score. And so that's how we'll place you in your first year math class or your first year English. In those cases, I've had students of my own in the past where they had gone optional and then took another test in the spring of their senior year to have that be their placement test. So that option exists there. But again, obviously, if you already have the test score in your pocket and you're able to use it for placement, it saves you a placement test and it puts you in a position to just know where you stand in terms of, am I taking intro to lit freshman year? Am I bypassing, elementary functions for math? What is, my path in terms of my placement? And we have seen some schools, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head which one it was that we gave this example for earlier, where it was just for their engineering students, they require SAT math for the placement, not even for admissions, but for placement in their math classes. Okay, sorry, I went backwards there. So big question we get all the time, and as a counselor, I get this frequently. Why should I even have and submit scores if so many scores are optional? We saw the test optional trend even before the pandemic, but obviously it increased there. And as you may have noticed, since then, some schools have come back and said, nope, we absolutely require them. Tufts University in Massachusetts has made a big statement saying they feel as though students were coming in not as prepared when they were solely basing it on GPA, and so they've brought that back in. Some of this has to do with GPA inflation. So you're seeing a lot of schools coming back and saying, I need both. And so one part of this is the submitter advantage. At highly selective schools, score submitters are admitted at a higher rate. It's just a fact. These schools have shared this information. For example, the overall admit rate to UVA last year was 20.57%, but 72% of those 9,875 students who were accepted submitted test scores. And it should be noted that those test scores were in the 1350 and above range for most of them. And so this is really important to keep in mind that they might be optional, but more of those students are submitting scores, so you're competing against students who have scores. It doesn't mean you can't go optional, but it's just something to be aware of when you think about statistically what's happening in acceptances. For Georgia Tech, 79% of admitted students submitted scores. So that's nearly 80% of their accepted students shared scores. Were they all perfect? No. Were they all 1350? Likely not, but when we look at the averages, they're in that range. Sometimes another thing we want to look at here is that it opens doors to opportunities. SAT scores can do a lot for honors programs and different things, like West Virginia, for example, requires a 1230 SAT or above for acceptance into their honors program. Honors programs come with a lot of benefits and things that students really enjoy. And there's a different, some schools you get a co-conferred degree with the honors program. Sometimes you get priority registration, working with professors, increased research opportunities. So there's never it's very difficult for me to find a situation in which it would not be beneficial for a student to try to have their best score, unless they're completely applying to test blind schools. And even then, plans change, you add a new school to your list. I recommend that all students take the test at least twice so that they can super score. And certainly, there's also access to larger merit scholarships. For example, Hofstra University reserves top scholarships for score submitters. Other schools will say, okay, we're just looking at GPA for merit scholarships. Other ones will look at GPA plus extracurriculars. A lot of schools, it's GPA plus standardized test score. And this is another opportunity, why I say take a test, is it lets the scores speak. So for example, if there's anything that's not reflected in a student's transcript, I've had students that 9th grade math didn't go well, but then they started to do a lot better. And then they crushed it on the SAT math. Show that, and that explains something that happened in that first math class. Maybe something was going on as you transitioned to high school. Maybe sophomore year in geometry, it just wasn't your thing, but look what you did on this test. You have personal experiences, and just in life, things happen, and you can show that you've recovered, that you've grown from there. Highlight potential in lieu of limited access to advanced coursework. So for students in particularly rural school districts or places where maybe they're just not offering as many AP classes, or it's a very small school and there just aren't as many elective classes related to the topic that you're interested in. If there's just things where you can't show your ability, or you just have fewer opportunities than other students to do so, this can really show potential despite any limitations that your school might have presented to you. And by no means am I suggesting that's the case at Woodgrove, but this is something we've suggested to students in the past, especially in homeschooling situations. Schools where, I was working with a family recently where they were at a very, very small private school that did not offer AP classes. This is a chance to be like, okay, on a standardized level, this is what I can achieve. And then, as I mentioned too, it's always nice to bypass a placement test at many colleges. Nice way to just know that that's all set and you don't need it. Again, there's still some schools that will have you take a test like the AccuPlacer or their own test that they've created, but this can be a helpful way of avoiding that. All right. So next steps for families, take the mock test. I hope you're going to take it with us this Saturday. I will send the registration link to everyone in attendance, and we can get that back out to members of the Woodgrove community as well to take the test with us this Saturday. And then book a consultation with somebody like myself. You'll find me on the list when you click on book a consultation, as well as my colleagues Jennifer and Fazia, so that you can get a test prep plan that works for you. You'll find a lot of availability on there, daytime, nighttime, to meet with us to go over those results. And then I would encourage you to consider enrolling in customized tutoring. It's where we see the best results. Self-study can be great, but a lot of times you do want to be able to have a tutor inform how that self-study should go and to work in conjunction with you as you prepare for a test that has a lot of strategy related to it. And every student has an area that they need to work on, and every student can maximize their score. And then you want to track progress, retake practice tests. We talked about building stamina with practice tests so that students aren't feeling mentally exhausted when they're taking the official SAT, and the ability to measure improvement. It's really, really heartening for a kid to see progress from one mock test to the next before they take the official test and seeing like, wow, I got 2 more right on the geometry section than I did last time. And the geometry section, is only typically speaking 8 questions in total. So seeing 2 more right there, that's a bunch of more points that you could get for that, in different questions where they can go maximize their score potential. So I certainly recommend that. If you're going to engage with tutoring, that will become part of your plan. If you're not quite sure, you can take another mock test with us at any time, and we can make sure we recommend a solid time for you to take that. All right, so some big takeaways for parents tonight. I would say for all of your students, please encourage consistency. You want to help your child stay on track by setting a regular study schedule. This is not a test you cram for. I think we all know that. You want to have time allocated for both test prep and then outside practice. So that's tutoring and then your own individual work, doing practice questions, things of that nature. You want to provide support for that practice. You want a quiet, distraction-free study environment. Well, there's a lot of nice things that kids can get on their phone to do practice questions and things like that. You do want to have it formalized in a way that they can do it in a quiet environment, simulate test day, and have that quiet study as, just like they would want to study for any other test. But this is a more long-term studying process. And so you want to make sure that you have that. Be a cheerleader. Emotional support about this test. It stresses kids out. All their friends are talking about it at school. What did you get on this? Did you hear about this question? Are you taking this test? I am a mother of a sophomore, and I do have a daughter who's a freshman in college, and that stress really weighs on them. So we want to build a positive and motivating atmosphere to help them stay focused and confident, and to realize the benefits of this test, the things that it can help them with later on, and preventing regret when they're going through the admissions process as well. And track that progress together, review those practice test results, meet with us when, it's convenient to discuss how we make these improvements, and constantly talking about what does this mean for your college list? What does this mean for your goals? When do you think you want to test again? And making sure you're looking at the progress and seeing the gains that students make between tests. All right. And so you guys do have the test this weekend on January 11th. You have until Thursday to register, so please let us know. I will send everybody the link as well, so that you have it in front of you. But it includes the consultation to review your detailed score report, and it includes that digital workbook with 1,400 practice questions. So it's certainly well worth it. The test does start at 9 a.m. on Saturday. We do encourage students to be there for 8:30 just to get settled and to hear the instructions, and they should be done by 12 o'clock. That's how the timing works out, so they should be all set by then. So again, you'll be given a link to meet with any one of us to discuss these results and come up with that personalized prep plan. And so if you have any questions about that, please do let me know. If anyone's looking for the link, certainly let me know as well. And I will be sending it to everyone after tonight, and I'll be sending everyone the recording. We do have a New Year's promo, so I wanted to put it on here with this cute little graphic on the side for our buy 25 hours, get 5 hours free. That meshes really well with what we recommend for test prep. For example, for our students with at least 25 hours of test prep, on average, we see 150-point score increase. A lot of our families will do 35 hours or 50 hours of test prep as well. This is a great way to get started and to get 5 hours free. It does run through this Friday, so I know that that's right up against it with your test on Saturday, but certainly reach out to me and we can work with you on that. And so again, I am Bernadette Smith. I know that this got cut off here, so I will put it in the chat for everyone too, that if you have any questions, you can reach out to me via my email address. And then there's also my colleague, Karen, who works with your PTSO in particular and closely to establish these types of events. So you can also reach out to her if you have any questions. But certainly, I hope that I'm going to meet some of you next week as we review the results of your students' test. If you have questions, maybe you're not taking this one and you're taking the next one. Maybe you took one recently and you have some other questions. Maybe you have a younger student and you're wondering if they should take it. Please don't hesitate whatsoever to reach out to me. As I mentioned, I am a licensed high school counselor, happy to answer your questions and to point you in the right direction in terms of test prep and next steps. So let me see if I don't see any questions in the Q&A as of right now. And I know we're 10 minutes over at this point, so I do want to free people back into their evenings and wish you all well in the snowstorm that hit. And I hope everybody's staying safe and warm, and I hope everyone had a shovel so that they could get out. But again, I'm Bernadette Smith. This is Nova Star Prep. Thank you for joining us tonight, and I look forward to working with your families as you go through the test prep process. Thank you so much. Okay, let me just make sure there was no question there. All right, awesome. And thank you for the comment there. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I will send everything your way. So everything you need, you'll have it in front of you and you'll be able to review the recording and we can send it to your families as well out there. Thank you all so much and have a great night.